In 1980, a black pastor vanished without a trace from the devout town of Grays Hollow, Illinois. No witnesses, nobody, only silence, and whispers that she had turned against God. 28 years later, while clearing land near the abandoned Shepherd's Gate Church, a logger uncovers a blood-stained collar, a scorched Bible, and something far more disturbing, buried beneath a rotting tree stump. A secret buried by faith, never meant to be found. March 2008. On a misty early morning, the hills of Grays Hollow were wrapped in a dense fog, like a cold blanket draped tightly over the earth. The sky hung gray, not raining, but without even a hint of sun. A construction crew had been dispatched to clear ground for a road expansion project. They had been working for a week, digging through dry, stubborn layers of soil tangled with rotting roots. No one expected to find anything other than rubble and splintered beams from Shepherd's Gate Church, a long-abandoned house of worship forgotten for nearly 3 decades. Calvin Tate, a seasoned worker, was operating the excavator when a sharp, metallic clink cut through the usual grind of machinery. The bucket had hit something harder than rock. The machine jolted slightly, as if recoiling. Calvin killed the engine and jumped down, his expression wary. His steel-toed boots sank into the muddy ground as he knelt, brushing aside the freshly turned soil. In the dim light, the edge of a wooden box emerged, old, decayed, yet still intact in shape. "There's something here," Calvin called out, and several co-workers approached. The group fell into silence, then began digging by hand around the box. Layers of earth gave way, revealing the full object, a time-worn chest, crusted with mud. Iron nails rusted, its lid warped, as if ready to burst. One of the men, hesitant, pried it open with trembling hands. A foul odor rose instantly, damp, moldy, thick with ash and the scent of long-forgotten time. Inside were 3 items: a silver necklace engraved with the letters R.E., a white ceremonial robe stained yellow and blotched with dried reddish-brown blood, and a Bible with a scorched leather cover, the corners curled as though kissed by fire. Everyone froze. Silence engulfed them. A worker whispered, barely audible, as if afraid to disturb the sacred air, "Dear God, what is this?" The news spread faster than the wind rustling through the eucalyptus leaves. Within hours, state police had arrived, roping off the area. They brought cameras, evidence bags, and an air of grim urgency, as though standing at the scene of a crime that had waited decades for judgment. Hundreds of miles away, in the bustling chill of Chicago, Maya Ellison sat alone in her small apartment. The phone rang, an unfamiliar number. A man's voice, firm yet uneasy, came through the line. "Hello, this is the Illinois State Police Department. We need you to come in to identify certain pieces of evidence regarding your mother, Ruth Ellison." Maya froze. A few seconds passed like entire hours. She listened, her mind reeling. Ruth. That name. The mother who vanished in 1980, suddenly roared back to life, dragging with it a web of tangled memories. Part of Maya's heart surged with hope. The rest plummeted into a pit of dread. She packed in silence, each shirt, each notebook folded with the care of someone preparing for a journey with no return. She knew this wasn't just an investigation, it was a reckoning. Maya left Chicago in an aging car, the miles unfurling like shadows behind her. The roadside eucalyptus trees looked skeletal, like shattered spines clawing at a sky heavy with cinders. On the road, fragments of memory flickered. Her mother's eyes glancing back before stepping into the chapel that day, strange murmurs echoing through the sanctuary, and the last night she ever saw Ruth alive. But no one ever gave her answers. All she had ever been told was, "Ruth Ellison betrayed the Lord." When Maya stepped into the Grays Hollow Police Department, the air itself felt frozen. Fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over the evidence tray. She was led to a cold steel table. There it all lay, the familiar necklace, the blood-soaked cloth, and the very Bible Ruth once used to preach on Sunday mornings. "Can you confirm these belonged to your mother?" asked the detective, eyes glued to his notes. Maya swallowed hard. Her hand hovered over the book cover, trembling. "Yes, without a doubt. But why is it here? Why was it buried?" No one answered. Maya stood there, stunned. For the first time in nearly 30 years, she faced the truth she had always avoided. A truth buried deep beneath the dark soil of blind faith. And now, it was beginning to surface. Gray's Hollow hadn't changed much from the childhood memories etched in Maya's mind. The moss-speckled red brick roofs, the narrow streets covered in dry leaves, and the old grocery store with its faded, wind-tossed sign still held their aged, forgotten charm. High above, the tower of Shepherd's Gate Church loomed like a ghost. Its gray stone walls mottled with moss, shattered stained-glass windows catching weak beams of light. The atmosphere was suffocatingly still, as if every stone and wooden plank were guarding a secret no one dared to speak of. Early the next morning, Maya pushed open the door to the church's catechism library. The creaking wood groaned like a warning. Inside, dust cloaked everything. Pale light slipped through the broken windows, forming long beams that stretched across crooked, sagging bookshelves. The air reeked of mildew, aged paper, and ash, so thick it choked her breath. Her footsteps crunched softly over the dirty tile floor as she walked slowly forward. She ran her fingers along a shelf, brushing over the cracked covers of faded Bibles. Dust clung to her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. But something was off. Many of the shelves had been cleared. The empty gaps between books created an eerie sense of absence. The remaining volumes were torn, their covers shredded and pages scattered, as if someone had tried to erase something no one was meant to read. Maya carefully picked up an old notebook and flipped through a few pages. On one stained, yellowed sheet, scribbled in jagged red ink, were the words, "The white flame purifies the sinful soul." She murmured it aloud, brow furrowing, a chill seeping into her skin. A gust of wind swept through the broken window, scattering loose pages from the shelves with a rustling sound like ghostly whispers. She moved deeper into the library. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. Her eyes landed on a book with hand-drawn diagrams. Faded black ink sketches of the church's basement. Red ink had been used to blot out sections, lines angrily crossed and overridden as if someone had desperately tried to erase the traces. Just then, a figure appeared at the end of the aisle. A thin man in a worn leather jacket, his curly hair unkempt, walked slowly but with a piercing gaze. He stopped and watched Maya for a moment, his eyes calm but intense. His footsteps rang out, gently, like a knock at the door of memory. "Are you looking for someone too?" he asked, his voice deep and hoarse, echoing in the stillness. Maya flinched, clutching the book in her hands. "And you?" she replied, cautious but firm. "I'm Dylan Grant," he answered, his gaze steady. "I'm looking for my mother, Esther Grant. She disappeared in 1979. His voice softened at the end, a flicker of pain crossing his face. Maya blinked, a shiver running down her spine. "She was black, wasn't she?" she asked, half statement, half question. Dylan nodded, his eyes tinged with sorrow. The air between them grew still. In that silence something unspoken passed between them, an invisible thread tying their pasts together. They didn't need to say it aloud. They knew. They were both children of women who had been swallowed whole by the same church, the same secret. Dylan sighed and reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, worn notebook. He opened it and pointed to a handwritten line. "Ceremony 19. The Lord received my soul through the white flame." The black ink had smudged in places, but it remained legible. Maya's breath caught. Her eyes narrowed in recognition. "That handwriting! It's Doris Wade's," she whispered. Her voice rasped. She took care of me after my mother disappeared." Dylan nodded, lips pressed tightly. "I found this hidden in the spine of a prayer book. Looks like someone didn't want it discovered." He paused, glancing around the messy library. "Do you know where Doris is now?" Maya looked at him, resolve flashing in her eyes like flint. "She lives near the edge of the woods, close to the old post office," she said. A fragile hope stirred within her. They exchanged a look, one of silent understanding. They weren't just two strangers who had met in a ruined library. They were remnants of a buried past, and they had decided, together, they would find Doris and confront the darkness waiting for them ahead. Doris Wade lived in a small house at the far end of the pine woods on the southern edge of Gray's Hollow. The dirt path leading to her home was narrow, littered with loose stones and carpeted in moss and fallen leaves. The tall pines flanking the road formed dense green walls that blocked out sunlight, leaving the air perpetually dim and chilly, even in broad daylight. The roof of Doris's house sagged, with broken tiles exposing rotting wooden beams beneath. An old chimney exhaled thin curls of gray smoke, blending into the mist of the late afternoon. When Maya approached and knocked, the sound echoed in the stillness. A dry, hollow thud, like a hammer striking the past. No one answered at first. The heavy wooden door cracked open slightly, revealing an old, cautious eye. That gaze wasn't just wary. It held a deep, abiding fear. The fear of someone who had lived too long with secrets heavy on the soul. "I'm Maya, Ruth Ellison's daughter," Maya said, her voice urgent but steady. The door immediately slammed shut. The sound of locks sliding into place rang out, cold metal clinking in finality. Maya stood motionless, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. But then, after what felt like an endless minute, the door opened again. Wider this time. Doris said nothing. She simply stepped back and gestured for them to enter. Inside, the house was dim. The scent of dried lavender mixed with damp wood and old mold clung to the air. As Maya and Dylan stepped in, it felt like crossing the threshold into another world, a place where time had long since stopped. They sat around a worn kitchen table, its surface scratched and marked with black burn stains, each one a trace of meals and years gone by. Doris sat across from them, her thin hands clasped tightly together on the table. The flickering oil lamp cast her shadow on the wooden wall, tall and ghostly. She stared at Maya for a long time, eyes full of things unsaid, restrained. Finally, in a hoarse voice, she spoke. "You look like your mother, but your eyes, they've lost their faith." Maya raised her gaze and met Doris's eyes. "I'm trying to find it again," she replied, her voice raspy but resolute. When Maya mentioned the notebook and the phrase "Fire Lamb Hollow," Doris froze. Her hands trembled, the joints frail and twitching on the tabletop. She rose slowly and walked toward the bedroom. Every step creaked on the old wooden floor, stretching tension like a drumbeat in the night. Minutes later, she returned, holding a small, dusty wooden box. She placed it on the table, her hand still faintly shaking. "There are things I swore I'd never speak of again," Doris said, her voice like wind passing through trees. "But if the Lord has brought you back, then I can't stay silent." Her voice dropped to a whisper as she began to recount what lay beneath the church. The basement known as the White Lamb's Hollow. Doris described it in broken sentences, her gaze distant as if she were watching the horrors again through a haze. It was not a place of prayer. It was a place of punishment. Black women, accused of betraying God's word, were dragged down there, bound to wooden chairs with coarse rope. Candlelight cast flickering shadows on the cold stone walls. The air smelled of melting wax, blood, and rusted chains scraping against stone. Doris closed her eyes. They were forced to recite confessions. If they didn't, they were tortured until they could, but no one survived to tell the tale, They disappeared. She whispered the names of those involved. Reverend Ezekiel, the spiritual leader with a voice as commanding as it was cold, Jonah, his right hand who carried out the rituals with blind zealotry, and Ellen Smith, the town mayor, the patron and financier behind it all, pulling the strings from behind a political veil to hide the crimes. Ruth tried to expose them, Doris said, eyes glassy with tears. She wrote an accusation. I saw her carry a Bible marked with 3 words, Fire, Lamb, Hollow. I didn't understand it then, but now... Doris opened the wooden box and pulled out an old key with a tarnished ring. She placed it on the table and slid it toward Maya. The basement lock hasn't changed. The old prayer room door. You need to find the truth, Doris said, her voice trembling but firm. Maya picked up the key. Her eyes lingered on Doris's face, then turned to Dylan, who was already gripping the strap of his bag, determination burning in his eyes. When they left the house, the sky had turned a deep gray of approaching dusk. The cold slipped through their clothes, biting into their skin like a warning of the danger that lay ahead. Neither of them spoke. Their footsteps crunched over a path thick with dry leaves. The only sound left was the wind howling through the pine trees. In the distance, the tower of Shepherd's Gate Church loomed silent, a sentinel standing watch over a secret that had never been told. Maya and Dylan stood before the decayed wooden door of the old prayer room. The surface was rough, peeling, covered in a thick layer of dust and tangled with cobwebs. Maya's hand gripped the key Doris had given her, her palms slick with cold sweat. Around them, only the sound of wind howling through the cracks in the door, sweeping up dry leaves that scattered wildly, blending with the pounding rhythm in their chests. She glanced at Dylan, an anxious, resolute look. They exchanged no words, only a shared understanding through their eyes. Whatever lay beyond this door could be the gateway into the dark mystery they had sworn to uncover. Maya slid the key into the rusted lock, her hand trembling slightly as she turned it. A sharp, dry click echoed. The heavy door creaked open, its hinges groaning eerily, revealing pitch-black darkness beyond. A cold draft swept out, as if time itself had frozen behind that door for decades. They turned on their flashlights. The narrow beams illuminated mossy, mildew-stained stone walls. Green-gray fungus clung stubbornly to every surface. The space gradually came into view. A cracked wooden restraint chair with worn leather straps, bloodstains dried around the edges like echoes of desperate struggle. On the wall, an inverted wooden cross hung in thick dust and cobwebs, its warped shadow dancing under the weak beam of light. A jagged line of dark red writing was scrawled on the wall. Salvation is not for those who betray their kind and destiny. The writing was crude, drawn with a shaky hand. Parts of the letters were smeared but still legible. Maya swallowed hard, her throat tightening, her grip on the flashlight so tight her knuckles turned white. In the corner, Dylan crouched down. His flashlight flickered across something partially buried under thick dust. He lifted a tattered old notebook, its leather cover frayed and yellowed. He flipped quickly through the pages, his eyes freezing on a long list of names labeled Purified. At the very bottom, 2 names stood out, Ruth Ellison and Esther Grant. Next to the notebook lay a VHS tape, the label smudged in fading black marker, Ritual 23, Ruth/Esther. Maya held her breath, her heart pounding, her fingers brushing the tape label as if she were touching the final artifact left of her mother. A rush of emotion surged within. Pain, fury, and a desperate longing to uncover the truth buried for nearly 30 years. Suddenly a loud noise rang out, a hinge groaning behind them. The prayer room door swung open. Arthur Bell appeared, his face flushed with anger and panic. He wore a faded gray coat, hunched over, his eyes flashing with rage at the sight of Maya and Dylan. "What the hell are you 2 doing here?" he shouted, his voice booming with menace in the confined space. Maya and Dylan exchanged a decisive look. No words were needed. Dylan took a step toward Arthur, but Arthur lunged first, grappling Dylan with violent intensity. Heavy breaths, scuffling sounds filled the room. Arthur grabbed Dylan's collar, shoving him, both staggering. Maya froze in alarm but shook herself out of it, scanning the room, then gripped the flashlight tighter and swung it hard into Arthur's shoulder. The blow sent him reeling, releasing Dylan, stunned. Dylan seized the opportunity, locking Arthur's arm and dragging him toward a small storage room on the west side of the chamber. Maya flung the door open, the hinges shrieked. Dylan shoved Arthur inside, slammed the door shut and bolted it, trapping him inside amidst loud banging and a stream of frenzied curses. The pounding slowly faded. They both leaned against the cold stone wall, gasping for air. Maya clutched the VHS tape, the flashlight beam gleaming off its silver label. Her voice cracked from emotion, but her words came out steady, resolute. "We don't have much time," she said, eyes locked on Dylan. "This is the final piece to expose the truth about my mother and everyone else who disappeared." Maya and Dylan decided to find a way out of the church before being discovered. Their hurried yet silent footsteps echoed across the cold stone floor. The back door was still ajar, the faint beam of light from the corridor gradually fading, swallowed by the dense darkness outside. As they stepped out, the freezing air hit their faces. The night sky was blanketed with thick gray clouds, the moon hidden behind heavy masses, as if it too wished to conceal the terrible truths clawing their way up from the earth. Wind howled through the trees like a ghostly warning. Dylan looked around, eyes sharp, clutching Maya's shoulder, urging her to move faster. Back at the car, Maya carefully placed the VHS tape and the leather-bound notebook into a canvas bag, whispering a silent prayer. "Lord, please protect this truth from the hands of the wicked." She started the engine. The roar of the car broke the stillness of the night as they drove away from the church, enveloped in heavy silence. They headed straight for the local police station. Maya walked in, gripping the evidence bundle, trying to stay composed as she faced the officer on duty. She explained everything, about the victim list, the notebook, the VHS tape, but the officer simply shrugged, his eyes distant, as if her story were just another tall tale. "Not legally admissible," he said curtly, pushing the bundle back toward Maya. "We need verified evidence, certified through proper channels." Maya was speechless. She stared at the officer, hand tightening around the bag. The pressure inside her chest surged like a quiet blaze. Dylan placed a hand on her shoulder, gently leading her outside. On their way out, Maya couldn't hold back. She slammed her fist against the car door. "They don't want to see the truth. They're afraid of it." "Then we'll make them look," Dylan said, his voice low but determined. They drove to Channel 8, an old building with a flickering neon sign. Maya stood at the reception desk and poured everything out: her mother's disappearance, the VHS tape, the list of victims. She tried to keep her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed desperation. "Please, help us. This tape could save others. It could expose the evil that's been hidden for years," she pleaded. But the producer rejected her flatly, eyes cold. "Unverified content. We can't air it." The response cut into Maya like a knife. She stepped back, the floor beneath her seeming to tilt. They walked out of the building, the dim street lamp casting long shadows across the cold pavement. Dylan looked at her, eyes unwavering. "If they won't broadcast it, we will." Maya took a deep breath and nodded. They returned to the small apartment Dylan had rented. A dim desk lamp cast warm light across the worn furniture. They got to work immediately, opening a blog, uploading segments of the tape, scanning and posting pages from the notebook. Dylan edited the footage. Maya wrote sharp, urgent captions, pouring all her grief and fury into each sentence. They emailed the files and a full report to major news outlets and federal networks, placing fragile hope in the compassion of a stranger. At that moment, Maya closed her eyes, placing a hand on her mother's old Bible, and whispered, "Lord, don't let this truth be buried again. Please bring light to the darkest places." Meanwhile, rumors had begun to spread around town. Whispers about a mysterious discovery, about Arthur Bell's disappearance, about strange figures lurking near the church. Sensing the situation slipping from their control, Ezekiel and Jonah went to Ellen Smith, mayor of Grays Hollow, and the hidden power behind it all. Ellen sat in a leather chair in her lavish office, golden light casting sharp angles across her cold face. She smirked as Jonah reported, "Those kids think they can take down this whole town?" Ellen crossed her arms, voice dripping with contempt. "Find them, no matter what, and this time, no loose ends." Ezekiel and Jonah exchanged glances and nodded. All three knew this game now had no way back. In the pitch-black darkness of the west storage room in Shepherd's Gate Church, Arthur Bell snapped awake. A dull ache throbbed at the back of his head, sending waves of dizziness through his body. Everything around him was black as ink. He had no idea how long he had been locked in, only vague flashes. Maya's steely face, Dylan's grip on his shoulder, and the crushing blow of a flashlight before everything went black. Arthur scrambled to his feet, hands groping around the cramped space, fingernails scraping against rough wooden walls. No window, no light. The stench of rot and rust filled his lungs. He slammed his fists against the door. Once, no answer. Again, still nothing. His screams echoed back at him, his own voice bouncing like a mocking chorus. He gasped, chest heaving. "I can't die here," he muttered. "I won't." Taking a few steps back, he hurled his shoulder at the door. The first impact threw him back. The second made the hinges groan. On the third, something cracked. The wooden frame buckled, and the door burst open with a splintering crash. Arthur collapsed into the icy hallway of the church. Damp air poured into his lungs, triggering a violent cough. No guards. The place was deserted, or so it seemed. But he knew. They never let anything slip past unnoticed. He staggered out of the building, feet crunching over broken glass and gravel. Outside, the wind cut like knives. Street lamps blurred behind thick fog. In the distance, headlights from an SUV lit up the mist. Two figures visible inside, unmoving. As Arthur passed, a voice crackled over a radio from inside the car. "Target on the move. Mayor's orders, take him alive." Engines roared. Arthur glanced back, saw the SUV surge forward. He bolted down Grays Hollow's narrow streets, behind the pharmacy, past the boarded-up bakery, through the old cemetery. His breath tore through his throat. His heart pounded like a drumbeat of dread. Finally, he spotted Dylan's apartment, the flickering yellow light behind a thin curtain. He rushed toward it like a drowning man, grabbing for air, pounding the door with both fists. "Open up! It's me. I know who's behind this. I'll tell you everything." Inside, Maya and Dylan sat frozen. Maya reached for the phone, ready to dial 911. Dylan clutched a kitchen knife. But in the end, Maya opened the door. Arthur collapsed inside, his face ghost white. He scanned the room, like someone being hunted. "Lock the door, now," he whispered. Dylan bolted it and pulled the curtains shut. Maya helped him into a chair. He trembled, panting, then pulled from his coat a bundle wrapped in torn oilcloth. "I got this from Ezekiel's old office, hidden under the altar." Maya opened it. She and Dylan went still. A long list of donors to something called the Faith Restoration Fund. Alongside were transaction codes, ritual logs, and worst of all, a list of offerings. At the bottom, Ruth Ellison, Ritual 23, Esther Grant, Ritual 22. Next to their names, Bloodline Valid, High Influence, Threat to Order. Arthur spoke, his voice hollow. They weren't just punishing, they were purging, according to some sick belief that women of color were the root of rebellion in the church. People like Ruth, like Esther, they were seen as poison trees in the white forest of faith. Maya stood and turned on the camera. "Repeat everything. On video." Arthur nodded in despair. She zoomed in on his face. Dry lips, panicked eyes. "My name is Arthur Bell. I was a ritual secretary at the church. I witnessed the selection, the processing, the purging. Ruth Ellison. I saw her dragged away, gagged. I stayed silent. But not anymore." Maya uploaded the recording and the documents to the FBI's email. She also sent copies to major news outlets. As soon as the status changed to sent, her chest lightened, if only slightly. Arthur remained seated, eyes darting toward the window. "They're coming," he whispered. "I can hear them." Outside, the wind howled. A faint red glow flickered behind the curtain. A cigarette. A silhouette stood still, unmoving. The scent of charcoal smoke seeped in through the doorframe. That night, Gray's Hollow swallowed another confession. But this time, the confession had made it online, and for the first time in 28 years, the truth had a chance to survive. Night fell over Gray's Hollow, blanketing the town in a cold mist, thin as a funeral veil, stretching endlessly across every crumbling rooftop. In a small rented apartment on the third floor of an aging complex, Maya, Dylan, and Arthur huddled close around a rickety wooden table. A single dim bulb cast a yellow light over a stack of fragile paper files, a faded VHS tape, and pages Maya had just photocopied from the original documents. No one spoke. Each tick of the clock sliced through the silence like a blade. Arthur exhaled sharply, tapping his fingers against the edge of the table, an erratic rhythm born of fear spiraling out of control. His eyes were fixed on the window, waiting for it to move. Then it did. A shadow flickered past the glass. Just a split second, but enough for Arthur to bolt upright, hissing through clenched teeth. "They've found me!" The words detonated the silence. Dylan shot up, rushing to the door, one hand gripping the lock. Maya lunged for the backpack, her hands trembling as she stuffed in the notebooks, the tape, the recorder, and the photocopied evidence. Outside, footsteps pounded the hallway, slow, heavy, deliberate, the sound of leather boots hitting the wooden floor like funeral drums. One step, then two, then three. Then came the knock. Loud, brutal, as if the door might explode at any second. "Arthur!" Dylan barked. "Hold the door!" Arthur charged forward, throwing his weight against the door, trying to become the barricade himself. But within seconds, the hinges screeched. The door burst open with a violent crack. Arthur was thrown backwards to the floor as two large figures surged in, faces masked, dressed entirely in black. A fist flew toward Dylan. He dodged, grabbed a wooden chair from the table and hurled it. Maya snatched the backpack, ducking under the lunge of the second intruder. She and Dylan slipped into the rear hallway, toward the back exit. "Go!" Dylan yelled. "Don't let them catch us!" Arthur remained behind, his screams echoing after them. "Don't leave me! Don't—" They pounded down the narrow stairwell, each step vibrating beneath their feet. The back door flew open. Cold air smacked their faces. Maya didn't pause. She jumped into the alley. Dylan close behind. They sprinted toward Dylan's old sedan, parked beside a dumpster. The engine roared to life. Maya barely had her seatbelt on when a black SUV appeared at the alley's mouth. Headlights blazed into the rear window. "Shit!" Dylan cursed, yanking the wheel and slamming the gas. The car skidded but steadied. The SUV gave chase. The town was silent save for the scream of engines and the crunch of tires on wet pavement. As they rounded the bend at the end of Cedar Street, Arthur suddenly stumbled from the darkness, eyes wide, hand raised. "Stop! I know a way out!" Maya looked at Dylan, fear in her eyes, but the SUV was closing in. She clenched her jaw. "Pick him up!" Dylan braked hard. Arthur dove into the back seat, panting. "They're using trackers, phones, even traffic cameras. I know how to lose them." Maya ripped the battery from her phone. Dylan did the same. They tossed everything out the window. Dylan swerved, veering off into the northern woods. No streetlights. No cameras. The SUV stayed close. Suddenly, Arthur lunged forward and yanked the steering wheel. "I'm sorry, I have to do this," he screamed. The car spun out of control, slammed into the roadside ditch. Tires screamed against gravel. It flipped halfway and skidded. Windshield shattered. Airbags deployed. Dylan's head slammed into the door. Maya was flung forward, her knee torn open. Arthur kicked open his door and stumbled out like a madman. "I did enough," he screamed toward the oncoming lights. "I brought them. Keep your promise." A single gunshot cracked the air. Arthur's chest convulsed like it had been struck by a hammer. He collapsed, silent. Maya was dazed, blood trailing from her forehead. She dragged Dylan out. He staggered, but was conscious. Without thinking, they fled into the woods. Behind them, headlights cut across the underbrush. A low voice echoed, "No survivors." Maya gripped Dylan's hand and pushed forward into the thick darkness. In the distance, faint sirens began to wail, weak, scattered. But to Maya, it was the only sliver of hope left in a nightmare closing in from every direction. The darkness in the forest of Gray's Hollow wasn't merely the absence of light. It carried the dry chill of death. Maya and Dylan were dragged across the uneven ground, their legs scraped raw, lungs heaving as they tried to scream through the cloth gagging their mouths. With blindfolds over their eyes, all they could perceive were the heavy footsteps, the howling wind, and the ragged breaths of those escorting them. The heavy wooden doors of Shepherd's Gate Church creaked open like whispers from hell. Their bodies were hurled onto the cold stone floor. The clanking of a lock echoed behind them. A low voice rang out from atop the stairs. "Prepare the offering." As they were hauled down into the cellar, the air thickened with the scent of damp rot, candle wax, and dried blood. The dimly lit chamber flickered with dozens of flames, casting warped shadows along the moss-covered walls. A large, inverted crucifix hung suspended in the center, with a noose dangling ominously beneath it. Ellen Smith emerged from the shadows, her black velvet gown brushing the stone floor, her eyes as cold as a high priestess of a decaying faith. She approached Maya and leaned in close, her lips nearly brushing the girl's ear. "Your mother begged me to spare you. She cried, Maya, like a lost lamb. She said, 'Don't let my daughter see this,' and I agreed. But now, who will beg for you?" Maya was bound to a wooden chair placed at the center of the room. The ropes bit into her wrists, each heartbeat fanning the fire of despair. Dylan knelt nearby, head bowed, mouth sealed shut with black cloth. He looked up at her. His eyes pleaded what his voice could not. "Don't give in." Jonah and Ezekiel, dressed in white robes embroidered with blood-red thread, calmly arranged ritual tools: a brass bowl, a flask of holy water, a ceremonial dagger. Whispers echoed from the corners of the room, as though the spirits of past victims still lingered, unrested. In that moment, memories flooded Ezekiel. He had once been a true shepherd to his community. In 1973, he had hidden a young black girl from a purification rite, believing mercy to be God's will. But when the council discovered his defiance, they threatened to strip him of his priesthood. That fateful night, Ezekiel surrendered the girl himself. Offering her up to the rite in exchange for his position, he collapsed at the altar afterward, whispering for forgiveness. "I chose light by extinguishing hers." Since then, he vowed never to waver again. In his secret sermons, he'd declare, "Compassion is the devil's touch. Faith must not tremble." Today, his hand trembled slightly as he raised the blade, but he pressed forward, believing ruthlessness was necessary to preserve the divine in darkness. Elaine circled Maya, her voice mocking. You think you're acting on faith, Maya? That this rebellion is holy? Faith isn't defiance, it's submission. Ruth didn't understand that, and now her daughter will fall, just as she did. But Elaine, too, remembered. Years ago, she'd sat quietly in the back pews of Shepherd's Gate, scribbling down Ruth Ellison's sermons with admiration. She'd dreamed of becoming the first female pastor in Gray's Hollow. That dream shattered when the church council declared God does not call women to preach. Even Ruth, compassionate Ruth, had remained silent. Betrayed by her role model and denied her calling, Ellen made a vow. Never again would she stand on the losing side. She allied herself with the secret council, built her own empire of belief, one founded on sacrifice and silence. I didn't betray God, she once whispered to Jonah. I simply chose the version of him men would obey. Ezekiel raised the blade. The steel gleamed in the candlelight like the scythe of a fallen angel. The room held its breath. Maya lifted her head, eyes shining with a final spark. She didn't respond with fury, but with a silent prayer. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Then, a thunderous crash. The cellar door flew open. A commanding voice cut through the chaos. FBI, drop your weapons! Flashlight swept the chamber. Elaine stumbled back, her mouth agape. Jonah turned to flee, but an agent tackled him to the ground. Ezekiel dropped the dagger. It clattered against the stone. A cold metallic scream. A woman in an FBI jacket rushed forward to untie Maya. Are you Maya Ellison? Yes, she gasped. We tracked you through your locator and your hidden camera. The agent pointed to a crevice in the wall where a tiny device glinted. Maya's earlier surveillance. We have everything we need. Thank you for holding the line. Ellen was hauled to her feet. She stared at Maya one last time, not with pride, not with defiance, but with a hollowness that revealed the collapse of all she'd built. In her eyes, for the first time, there was fear. Maya stood on shaky legs, but she stood. Dylan rushed to embrace her. In the chaos of flashing lights, radio chatter, and snapping handcuffs, all Maya could hear was a whisper. Not from Dylan, not from the agents, but a warm voice rising from deep within her memory. True faith never dies, it only waits to be called back. The atmosphere in Channel 8's waiting room was thick with anticipation. Maya and Dylan sat side by side, facing the television mounted on the wall. They said nothing. Maya's hands were ice cold despite the moderate air conditioning. Every footstep, every keystroke, every soft click of a closing door felt like part of a grim symphony, underscoring the moment of fate that was about to unfold. The door swung open. The station's anchor, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, entered, holding a file folder in her hand. We've verified the footage and the accompanying materials, she said in an even tone. The board held an emergency meeting and they've decided to air it live during prime time tonight. Maya didn't react immediately. She just looked at Dylan. He gave a slight nod. What they felt was a storm of emotion. Relief, fear, anxiety, and a final hope in justice. That night, at exactly 8:00 p.m., the main broadcast screen lit up with the footage. It began with images of the decaying corridor inside Shepherd's Gate Church. Then came the hidden camera footage captured by Maya, the ritual chamber, candlelight flickering against cold stone walls, an inverted cross swinging gently, and at the center, two women tightly bound, Ruth Ellison and Esther Grant. Maya could barely breathe as the image sharpened. Her mother, head bowed, shoulders trembling, dried blood at the hem of her white vestment. Beside her, Esther whispered prayers in desperation. Ezekiel's voice echoed as he recited ancient liturgy in a dark, perverse tone. In the corner of the frame stood a group of onlookers. Clearly visible among them was Ellen Smith, wearing black gloves, her gaze void of empathy. All of America was stunned. On social media, hashtags like Ruth Ellison, Shepherd's Lie, and Justice for Esther exploded within minutes. Channel 8 aired a full-hour special analyzing the footage, interviewing experts on cult behavior and abuse of power within religious institutions. Outside Grays Hollow, media vans from major cities arrived in waves. Locals brought flowers, laying them along the church's perimeter fence. Some knelt in prayer, others cried out in fury. The police were forced to cordon off the area temporarily. Inside the studio, Maya never took her eyes off the screen. Toward the end of the footage, a single frame froze her blood. The camera panned slowly across the crowd attending the ritual. In a fleeting moment, a young girl with curly hair stood among them, eyes wide with horror. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, clutched tightly in her hands, a small Bible. Maya shot up from her chair. "Pause!" she yelled, her voice cracking. The technician hit pause. The frame stilled. The child, unmistakably, was Maya. Roughly 7 years old, Dylan looked at her. "Do you remember now?" But Maya only shook her head, eyes locked on the screen. Inside her mind, fragments began to rise. The smell of candle smoke. Her mother's whisper. "Don't look, Maya. Don't remember." A small hand holding her mother's in the frigid chamber. A scream, another hand pulling her away, and then nothing. She began to tremble. Cold sweat ran down her spine. For years, that memory had been sealed, an unconscious defense mechanism forged by a fragile mind. She had never remembered being there, until now. "She brought me into the ritual," Maya murmured. "She didn't want me to forget. She wanted me to be a witness." Dylan moved closer. "Maya, you're not a victim. You're the last witness." Outside there were shouts, honking horns, and whispered prayers in the crowd. But inside that waiting room, Maya faced the greatest truth of her life. She could have changed history from the very beginning if she hadn't been forced to forget. The scene on television that night spread across the country like wildfire. The screen lit up with images of a dark basement where 2 women were bound to stone pillars, the chanting of a ritual echoing from an old recording device, and the indifferent faces of those who bore witness. Ezekiel with fanatical eyes, and Jonah, cold, unblinking. In Grays Hollow, townspeople gathered around a large outdoor screen. Some wept, some turned away, others shouted in outrage. No one could have imagined that the church, where they had once knelt in prayer, was a stage for secret atrocities, hidden beneath white paint and hymns. Maya and Dylan sat quietly in a federal investigation office in Boston. The cold fluorescent lights casting down on thick stacks of files piled on the table. An officer led them into a small room with a large screen on the wall, where the footage played back, frame by frame. There was no longer any doubt. Ezekiel and Jonah bowed their heads in court and were sentenced to life in prison without parole. Their eyes now held no faith, only emptiness and defeat. But Maya didn't feel relieved, not even victory. A hollow ache echoed in her chest, repeating an old whisper. "There's still something your mother hasn't told you." She returned to Ruth's abandoned house on the outskirts of town. Quietly, she stepped into the room where her mother used to write sermons and journal entries. The framed photos had browned with age, the wooden desk warped by time, and on the bookshelf, the leather-bound notebook still sat, as if waiting for her 28 years later. Gently, Maya turned each page, tracing her mother's slanted handwriting. Notes on sermons, red-circled scripture, and fragmented reflections. Faith is standing tall, not bowing in submission. When the light vanishes, God tests who still keeps the fire within. She almost gave up, but something nudged her to check the inside of the back cover. And there, beneath a peeling layer of glue, was a small, carefully folded piece of paper hidden away. Maya pulled it out and slowly unfolded it. The words appeared. Simple, haunting. If you don't remember, then I believe. One day, you will. Maya's heart clenched, not because of the message, but because of the handwriting. She couldn't look away from those shaky yet familiar strokes. They weren't Ruth's. They were her own, from when she was a child. Memory flooded back like a tidal wave, unstoppable. Cold, dark space. The scent of candle wax and dried blood. The rhythmic, hypnotic chanting. A curly-hailed little girl, about 5 or 6 years old, hiding behind a large stone pillar, trembling. The flickering candlelight reflected in her wide eyes. Maya. In front of her stood Ruth, bound to a stone pillar in the center of the room, her mouth gagged, but her eyes searching desperately for Maya, filled with tears. Ezekiel stood at the front, reciting false confessions. Jonah approached, holding a gleaming silver dagger. He rarely spoke, he obeyed. But that night, when Ezekiel ordered him to cut Ruth's wrist for the ritual, he hesitated. Ruth looked directly into his eyes, not begging, just asking one question. Do you believe God forgives those who see the truth and still bow their heads? Jonah's hands trembled. For a moment, the blade wavered. But then, he clenched his jaw and carried out the ritual at Elin's command. He left immediately afterward, knowing he would carry that moment for the rest of his life. And Elin, she wasn't far. She stood right beside Ruth, whispering something in her ear. Maya couldn't hear the words, but she remembered her mother's eyes. Eyes that seemed to pass on everything she had left. Then Ruth screamed something, muffled by the gag, before collapsing onto the stone floor. The little girl, Maya, screamed too, but the cry existed only in her mind. No one heard. No one came to save her mother. Maya collapsed to the floor of the old room, clutching the piece of paper to her chest. Her breath was broken. The pounding in her heart echoed like a drum of memory. Ruth wasn't just a victim. She had deliberately allowed Maya to witness it all, so that the truth could never be buried, so no one, not even Maya, could claim they didn't know. But Ruth was also a mother. She had begged the cult to spare Maya's life. She had traded her own in return, traded her career, her dignity, everything, so that her daughter could live, carrying a memory like a seed buried deep in the ground. Now Maya understood why she had always felt like she owed her mother something she couldn't name. She owed Ruth the truth, and now she would speak it. No more silence, no more blindness. The truth had survived, through the memory of a child, and the courage of a mother. After days filled with truths and resistance, Maya began to feel her body give out. Not from physical wounds, but from the weight of memory. She hadn't slept deeply at night, only drifting off briefly before jolting awake, haunted by blurred images that drifted in and out like ghosts on the tide. In her dream, Maya found herself back in the basement. No more cameras, no more lights, just her, kneeling on the cold stone floor, small hands trembling in the flicker of a dying candle. From afar, Ruth's voice echoed, not clearly, but like a sorrowful lullaby. Faith is not silence, it is light in the dark. She woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a war drum. Breathing fast, she walked to the window. Outside, Gray's Hollow remained silent, not the silence of hiding, but the stillness before the second storm. While Dylan immersed himself in post-production with Laura Mendoza's documentary team, finalizing the film that would tell their entire journey from the wooden box to the courtroom, Maya returned alone to the ashes of her past, the home she and Ruth once shared. The house was now only cracked cement, a scorched wall standing like a broken tooth in a yard of yellowed grass. But Maya remembered every brick, every fracture. She ran her fingers along the western wall, where Ruth had once hidden her first notebook when threats loomed. Beneath loose plaster, Maya found a hollow. Inside, a moldy, frayed cloth pouch. She opened it, expecting little. But inside were scattered pages. Ruth's handwriting, intertwined with her own childish scrawl. They were prayers never spoken aloud. Fragments of conversation between mother and daughter from a time Maya couldn't even remember writing. Perhaps Ruth had taught her to write, and they had exchanged secret letters as a way to hold on to each other. Through hell. You are the light in my eyes. If I am gone, remember, light cannot be extinguished if you still believe. Maya fell to her knees, clutching the bundle to her chest, and cried. Not angry tears, but the kind that came from remembrance, from gratitude, from a forgiveness whispered by a soul that still watched over her. That evening, Maya walked to the town cemetery, carrying a single candle and her mother's old Bible. She stood quietly at Ruth's modest headstone, engraved with, "She who brought light into the dark." She lit the candle and placed it at the base. Then she sat on the ground. Opening the Bible, Maya began to read. Not the usual prayers, but Ruth's words, written in the margins. No one has the right to define faith in God's place. No one has the right to turn justice into blood ritual. A soft breeze stirred through the graveyard, brushing the flame. It danced, but didn't go out. Maya stared at the light, its glow reflecting in her eyes. In that moment, she no longer felt alone. Ruth was here. Esther was here. The women, once buried in the shadows of Gray's Hollow, now had a voice. Maya rose, wiped away her tears, and looked up at the night sky. The moon hung full, unclouded this time. She whispered, "I won't let your secret die in the dark." Starting tomorrow, Maya would no longer be just a witness. She would carry the lantern. She would rewrite the history. She would continue the words of the silenced. A few weeks later, at the Chicago Arts Center, the screening room was packed for the premiere of the documentary The Shepherd's Lie. Everyone present knew this wasn't just a film screening. It was a testimony, an unveiling, a visual indictment. In the back row, Maya Ellison sat quietly. She wore no heavy makeup, no eye-catching outfit. Her eyes never left the screen as her mother's name, Ruth Ellison, appeared in stark white on black. Every frame felt like a slow knife. The moment the box was unearthed, the suffocating silence of the basement, the screams of Ruth and Esther bound to stone pillars, and finally, the flashing beams of tactical lights as the federal team burst through the doors. Director Laura Mendoza chose to tell the story without sugarcoating. No emotional soundtrack, no sentimental narration, only the truth, raw, sharp, and unforgiving. The lens lingered on Ruth's face as she looked into the camera one last time, not with fear, but with a strange conviction that someone was watching, that this story would not stay buried. When the theater lights came on, the entire room stood up in unison. Applause echoed, not for Maya or Laura or any person, but for the truth itself. A truth once denied, once burned and buried deep, now stared back through hundreds of teary eyes. A few wiped their faces. A black woman held her daughter's hand and whispered something. A young man nodded slowly, as if reaffirming his faith in himself. Maya didn't rise. She remained seated, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Dylan sat beside her, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Between them was a shared understanding deeper than language. A few days later, Dylan returned to teaching at the Department of Theology and Sociology of Religion. He didn't say much about what had happened, but his students fell silent the moment he walked in. He published The History of Scripture Distorted, a study blending theology, philosophy, and evidence gathered from the Gray's Hollow case. In it, he dissected how power and faith had been weaponized to commit evil, and called on future generations to rekindle the meaning of belief with integrity. Maya didn't return to journalism. Instead, she wrote My Mother's Fire, What Faith Gave, and What It Burned Away, a book hailed by scholars and human rights advocates alike. It chronicled Ruth's journey, a pastor, a mother, a woman who sacrificed everything to protect the essence of faith from those who twisted it in its name. With the royalties from her debut book, Maya founded Ruth's Light. No grand office, just a small room in an old South Chicago building. But every day someone knocked on the door, a young person fleeing an extremist sect, a woman crushed by the blind faith of her husband, or a boy estranged from his family for defying church law. Maya never asked too much. She listened, then pointed to the bookshelf where a small photo frame sat. Ruth Ellison, smiling in a white robe, hand resting on young Maya's shoulder. Ruth's Light wasn't just an organization. It became a symbol of rebirth. From beneath the dust of pain, it gave voice to those once silenced. One winter afternoon, Maya returned alone to the hillside at Gray's Hollow. Snow blanketed the path, trees bare and still. On the ground, where the wooden box had once been unearthed, she placed a small white candle. Its flame flickered in the wind, dancing, but never dying. Maya closed her eyes and whispered, I've seen the dark, but I will not belong to it. And she knew that flame would continue to be passed on, from hand to hand, from generation to generation. Not for vengeance, not for mourning, but as a reminder. When truth is spoken, it will always burn brighter than even the deepest dark. That evening after the conference, Maya returned to her small apartment. She reopened her laptop and began reading messages of support from across the world. A new email appeared. A thank you note from a young woman in Texas who had once been trapped in a cult. She wrote, Because of your story, I found the strength to escape the darkness. Maya smiled, but then she recalled the image of the curly-haired girl in the footage. That girl was her. She had witnessed it all, but her memory had buried it to protect her own soul. At the special Channel 8 screening, Maya sat in the back row. When the footage showed Ruth bound, her eyes burning with unshakable resolve, Maya whispered, I remember now, Mom, and now the world will never forget. After the screening, she went to the cemetery and lit a candle at Ruth's grave. A new inscription had been carved into the headstone. Faith is not silence. It is the courage to speak when all others kneel before evil. Dylan, Lara, and a small group of supporters quietly gathered beside her. Dylan placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. You did what no one else dared, Maya. You brought light to the darkest place. Maya bowed her head, her tears blending with the cold night breeze. It wasn't me, she said softly. It was my mother. It was Ruth. It was all those who lost their lives just to keep their faith true. Truth can be buried, suppressed, twisted beyond recognition. It can be wrapped in silence, buried under threats, and locked beneath generations of fear and complacency. But truth does not die. It waits. It waits for a pair of eyes strong enough to see it, for hands brave enough to dig through the dirt, for a voice steady enough to speak above the silence of the afraid. Maya had once been silent, not because she was weak, but because she had been forced to forget. Her memories didn't vanish. They lived in flashes of unease, in the hollow ache she couldn't name, in the lines of scripture that inexplicably made her heart tighten. She didn't remember, but her body had never forgotten. And then the first light came. A crumbling note, a rusted key, a trembling videotape. The truth began to breathe again. Maya was no longer the hidden child beneath the horror. She became the storyteller, the one who carried the light out of the basement. She didn't walk alone. Dylan, who stood by her not just in belief but in action. Lara, the filmmaker who dared to show what others wouldn't even dare to witness. The people of Gray's Hollow, once bowed in guilt and silence, now stood facing the past. And Ruth, the woman who left behind everything, her life, her name, her future, just to plant a seed of hope. Ruth did not die in darkness. She lives on in every word Maya writes, in every pair of eyes that now see the story with their own. Now, Maya understands. Faith is not blind obedience. Faith is standing still in the storm, speaking what is right, even when you stand alone. It is refusing to stay silent when evil wears a holy mask. It is lighting a flame even when your hands are shaking and torn. Gray's Hollow was once a shrine of sacred deception, but now it is the beginning. The beginning of a generation no longer afraid of light, of people who believe in justice, not because they were told to, but because they saw the lie and chose to confront it with truth. Maya will not stop. Ruth's story is not an ending. It is the first chapter in a new journey, a journey to protect the flame in a world that keeps trying to extinguish it. Truth can be buried, distorted, but it never disappears. Faith is not silence, but the courage to speak what is right, even in the face of danger. Maya had learned that the light of truth and the strength of courage will always overcome darkness, and that in the darkest moments, hope can still be found. Not in hollow promises, but in sincerity, in unity, and in the depths of one's own heart. Gray's Hollow will no longer be a place of shadows. It will become the starting point for the rebirth of faith, of justice, and of a light that will never go out.